On an early autumn morning in rural Rivertown, Lieutenant General Anthony Ross drove his modest sedan to the lone gas station at the forest edge. Dressed plainly in a dark blue button-down shirt and crisp khaki trousers, he carried only a worn canvas bag filled with a bottle of milk and a few cans of dried provisions for his aging mother. The dawn mist still clung to the air, and the world felt hushed, as if holding its breath for the day's first light. Ross moved with the calm confidence of a man who had spent 3 decades under orders, each step measured and deliberate. He stepped into the convenience store, exchanged a polite nod with the sleepy cashier, and laid his items on the well-worn counter. Paying in crisp bills, he accepted his change, folded his receipt with a soldier's precision, and slipped it into his shirt pocket. There was nothing about his appearance or manner to attract undue attention. He looked every bit the quiet, middle-aged veteran, simply running an errand for family. But in an instant, normalcy shattered. A white and blue patrol car roared past and swung in front of Ross's vehicle, blocking the narrow access road just before the turn into the residential lane. 2 uniformed officers, both white, stepped out, their eyes sharp with unspoken suspicion. Not a word of greeting passed their lips. Instead, the first officer barked, "Where are you headed this early?" His partner, hand resting on his holster, demanded license and registration now. Ross, still calm, raised his hand in a courteous salute, despite not wearing his uniform. In measured tones, he replied, "Good morning, officers. I'm just picking up supplies for my mother. Here's my ID and the car registration." For a heartbeat, the world held its breath. Then, as the officers registered the name Anthony Ross on his identification, the unspoken question hung in the cool air. Did the color of his skin alter how they saw him? In that split-second, routine became tense. A simple traffic stop had turned into a fraught encounter, one where the dignity of a 3-star general would hang in the balance of another man's first impression. Lieutenant General Ross obeyed without hesitation when the taller veteran officer barked, "Shut off the engine! On hot iron, step out, sir." His hands rose slowly to 10 and 2 on the steering wheel. Then he turned the key and set his palms flat on the hood before unclasping his seatbelt. Every movement was measured, every breath steady, as though he were standing at attention in a drill formation. He opened the door and climbed out of his sedan, his posture straight and composed, an exhibition of the very discipline he had spent his life instilling in others. The younger officer, barely more than a patrol rookie, motioned sharply at Ross's canvas bag. Without a word, the veteran cuffed the bag's strap and shook it violently. The glass bottle of milk shattered on the pavement, white liquid spreading like spilled ink across dark asphalt. A woolen scarf, hand-knit by Ross's mother, tumbled free and snagged on the car's door handle, ripping clean through its soft fibers. The officers treated these items not as fragile reminders of family, but as mere evidence to be dominated, their rough handling speaking volumes more than any accusation. Then came the search of Ross himself. The veteran officer's gloved hand slid down the front of his waistband and paused at the polished grip of a service pistol holstered under his belt. He yanked it free and slapped it onto the car's hood with a thud that echoed in the still morning air. "This kind of weapon is not meant for civilians," he sneered, his voice cold and dismissive. There was no hint of respect for the regulations that had authorized Ross's carry, only the assertion that in their eyes his uniform and rank amounted to nothing against their unquestioned authority. Through it all, Ross remained silent. His ebony eyes reflected a quiet sadness, but not fear. Beneath his calm exterior lay the resolve of a soldier who knew that dignity was not surrendered under duress. As the officers continued their show of force, rattling pockets, flipping through notes, scanning identification, each gesture was less about ensuring public safety and more about reinforcing a power dynamic determined by skin color and assumption rather than by fact. Lieutenant General Ross stood with his back against the cool metal of his car's hood, arms at his sides, as a middle-aged woman across the street lifted her phone to record the scene. The younger officer hardened his gaze and barked, "Turn that off right now unless you want to be arrested." The woman's hands trembled as she lowered the phone slightly. She did not speak, only took a cautious step back, her eyes wide with uncertainty. Ross's lips pressed into a thin line, and he remained motionless, refusing to react. In that moment, he reclaimed his dignity through silence, offering no ammunition for further provocation. Meanwhile, the senior officer rifled through the documents. Ross had surrendered a driver's license from Virginia, a registration card listing Maryland. He squinted at the printed information and asked flatly, Who rented this car? His tone carried an unspoken doubt, one that sprang not from any discrepancy in paper, but from the color of the man standing before him. Ross lifted his chin and spoke in steady, measured tones. My name is Anthony Ross. I served in the United States Army for 30 years and retired just recently. There was no bravado in his statement, only an unvarnished truth delivered with the calm authority of a lifelong soldier. The two officers exchanged a silent glance, brows knitting in collective unease. The younger one grasped his radio microphone and spoke into it in clipped urgency, requesting backup. Possible suspicious black male, approximately 60 years old, operating an out-of-state vehicle. The language stung with implications, suspicious not because of Ross's actions, but because of the assumptions they held about his skin. In that instant, Ross recognized that this was no routine traffic stop. It was a confrontation born of bias, a show of power predicated on nothing more than a feeling triggered by his presence. And yet he stood firm, knowing that in the face of prejudice, restraint could be the most resolute display of strength. A few tense minutes later, a dark, unmarked armored vehicle rumbled up the narrow road and ground to a halt beside the patrol cars. Its rear doors swung open to reveal two plainclothes agents, their suits impeccably tailored and badges clipped to their belts. Without exchanging pleasantries, one of them produced a laminated ID card stamped U.S. Strategic Command and held it squarely before the local sergeant's face. The atmosphere shifted in a heartbeat. Released Lieutenant General Ross. Immediately the agent's tone brooked no argument. The patrol officers' faces drained of bravado hesitated for only a moment. The veteran sergeant eased the radio from his shoulder, and both men set their weapons and holsters gently on the hood of Ross's car, as though laying down a challenge they no longer intended to fight. On the sidewalk, passers-by froze in place still enough that the woman's phone continued to record every second of the unexpected intervention. Ross remained motionless, shoulders squared, eyes distant, yet unwavering. He offered no words of thanks, none were needed. His calm presence carried more weight than any salute. After the armored agent stepped forward and nodded to signal the end of the stop, Ross walked to the front of his vehicle, retrieved his scratched military badge from where it had fallen, and slipped it carefully back into his pocket. In just a few clipped orders, the true power at play had been laid bare, not weapons, but the authority of truth and rank recognized at the highest level. The incident exploded across social media within hours. Every newsfeed lit up with footage of two patrol cars flanking a dark, unmarked SUV, an armored vehicle that had appeared out of nowhere. The Department of Justice wasted no time, and an urgent sealed letter was dispatched to Monroe County authorities demanding an immediate explanation. By that afternoon, Chief Bowman had convened an emergency meeting with every mid-level commander and shift supervisor under his roof. The conference room was tense and claustrophobic, its blinds drawn against the late spring sun. On a large screen at the front, surveillance video froze on the moment the armored SUV rolled into frame. Bowman's voice cut through the stun silence like a bayonet. Who gave the order to escalate this stop to such a level without confirming the driver's identity? First, his jaw clenched, and for a long beat, no one dared to respond. Then from a shadowed corner of the room, a barely audible whisper drifted, "Sir," because his skin tone looked different. Heads snapped toward the speaker, and the hush that followed felt heavier than any roar of sirens. The officers in attendance shifted uncomfortably, avoiding eye contact with one another. On the projection screen, the scratched edge of General Ross's military badge gleamed in the early morning light, a stark reminder that prejudice once engraved leaves marks far deeper than any physical scrape. The meeting ground to a halt. Bowman lowered the remote, his expression unreadable. He glanced around the room as if seeing each man and woman present for the first time. What had begun as a routine inquiry into procedure had unveiled something far more troubling, an entrenched bias that no policy update alone could erase. With that unspoken admission hanging in the air, the gathering adjourned abruptly, leaving behind the unvarnished truth that this was not a one-off misstep, but a systemic failure demanding far more than disciplinary action. It required a collective reckoning. 3 days after the footage went public, Sergeant Calvin Mendez and Officer Daniel Howard found themselves standing before the United States District Court for the Southern District of Rivertown. The indictment, nearly 50 pages long, detailed charges that would reverberate far beyond Monroe County: organized abuse of authority, public humiliation of a senior federal officer, unlawful use of force and interference with a classified military communications device. For the first time in recent memory, a case of racial profiling at the highest level of law enforcement was being prosecuted in open court live-streamed to a nation still grappling with questions of justice and equality. Inside the courthouse, the atmosphere was somber yet electric. On one side, the prosecution presented a meticulously compiled record hours of surveillance video showing the abrupt escalation transcripts of General Ross's calm request for Code Black Sierra Zero and military communications confirming his identity and distress call. Testimony from eyewitnesses passers-by. The woman who recorded the incident on her phone and the Pentagon agents who intervened painted a portrait of a man wrongfully detained not because of any threat he posed, but because of the color of his skin. The defense offered little beyond counsel's assertions that the officers had acted reasonably in a routine stop. But when cross-examined with the unedited footage and the scratched badge they had forced Ross to relinquish, their arguments rang hollow. Jurors diverse in age, race, and background watched in silence as the evidence unfolded, their expressions a silent testament to the gravity of what they witnessed. Deliberation took fewer than 3 hours. When the jury returned, the judge rose and read the verdict in a clear, steady voice. "We, the jury, find the defendants, Calvin Mendez and Daniel Howard, guilty on all counts." There was no audible gasp, only a fragile hush. Immediately, both officers were stripped of their ranks and credentials on the courthouse steps, dismissed, terminated, and barred from any future law enforcement role. In that moment, the country saw something it had long demanded: clear accountability. For the first time, heroes and civilians alike watched as the system they once feared could indeed correct its course. The verdict did more than punish wrongful conduct. It signaled a turning point, proving that when truth and dignity stand together, justice can prevail. Within a week of the verdict, ripples of accountability spread far beyond Monroe County. More than 200 individuals, black men and women, who had endured wrongful detentions, filed a massive class action lawsuit in federal court, their claims extending from Rivertown to Mississippi, Florida, and Missouri. Each story echoed the same refrain: routine stops turned humiliating by unchecked suspicion. Law firms and civil rights groups joined forces to demand justice, turning what began as a single traffic incident into a powerful movement for those whose voices had long been silenced. State governments responded in kind. California, Illinois, Massachusetts, and Oregon each established independent commissions tasked with reviewing instances of police violence dating back before the year 2000. These panels scoured old records often buried in desk drawers or misfiled under innocuous labels, seeking patterns of abuse and erecting new transparency measures. Their findings would guide sweeping reforms: mandatory public disclosure of use of force reports, civilian oversight boards with subpoena power, and protections to prevent archival purges of misconduct cases. Meanwhile, on Capitol Hill, lawmakers convened an emergency hearing to examine the reasonable suspicion doctrine, a cornerstone of policing that critics now decried as a legal loophole for bias. Under intense bipartisan scrutiny, legislators drafted amendments requiring every stop, search, and seizure to be predicated on clearly articulable facts, documented in real time and subject to legal challenge. A proposed National Policing Integrity Act mandated digital logging of officer-citizen encounters, complete with audio or video, and created an appellate pathway for individuals to contest improper stops in federal court. The reverberations even reached the National Police Academy, which announced a new Ross scenario training module focused squarely on controlling implicit bias. Recruits would undergo immersive simulations designed to reveal and correct subconscious prejudices before they could manifest on the street. In classrooms and field exercises alike, instructors emphasized that true public safety depends not on instinctive suspicion, but on measured judgment grounded in both empathy and evidence. Slowly, a system once resistant to change began to bend under the weight of its own accountability and the quiet courage of a general who stood still until justice took notice. Across the country, universities and military academies began teaching what came to be known as the Ross effect, the idea that sometimes the most powerful protest is silence, and that a single still moment can force an entire system to pause and reflect. At the United States Military Academy at West Point, Cadets found themselves analyzing Ross's roadside detention not as a tactical error, but as an ethical case study. In ethics seminars, they were asked to imagine themselves as bystanders, not officers, to ask, if you encounter someone doing nothing threatening, would you still proceed with force or would you stop to question your assumptions? Assignments required cadets to rewrite the scene from the civilian's point of view, capturing the confusion of the woman filming on her phone, the horror of watching a high-ranking officer treated like a suspect, and the unsettling realization that prejudice can masquerade as protocol. Professors reported that these exercises sparked deeper conversations than any lecture on rules of engagement because they challenge future leaders to confront bias in their own decision-making. In metropolitan police training centers, a new wave of scenario-based exercises emerged. Recruits were placed in mock detainment rooms cuffed without justification and held under bright lights for 5-minute intervals. Biometric sensors tracked heart rate spikes, voice tremors, and sweat response data that revealed a startling truth: over 80% of participants reached peak stress levels within the first 5 minutes, mirroring the fear and helplessness felt by actual detainees. These findings prompted departments in New York, Chicago, and Los Angeles to revise their field training. Rather than drilling recruits solely on threats and tactics, instructors now emphasize stress awareness and empathy under pressure. Trainees learned that if 5 minutes of unjustified restraint can shatter a person's sense of security, then every stop must be justified not only by law, but by genuine articulable cause. By embedding the Ross effect into curricula across Ivy League ethics courses, ROTC programs, and precinct training academies, the nation began to reshape its understanding of authority. The lesson was clear: justice demands not just the power to act, but the restraint to question and the courage to listen when someone shows you what it truly means to hold your silence. In the months following the Ross verdict, a quiet exodus began among law enforcement leadership. Across the country, seasoned chiefs and commanders submitted early resignation letters, many citing the same line: "I have realized that I defended silence instead of defending justice." Their departures underscored a deeper reckoning within a system long hesitant to confront its own failures. Police departments in Phoenix, Denver, and Houston each moved swiftly to open their internal records to public scrutiny. Complaint files that once vanished into dusty archives could no longer be reclassified as training reports or swept under the rubric of administrative error. Every citizen's allegation of bias or misconduct was digitized, cataloged, and made searchable online, creating a permanent, transparent record that no future leadership could erase. Simultaneously, the Department of Defense issued an unprecedented directive. All field commands were ordered to circulate the unedited audio logs of General Ross's phone call, Code Black Sierra Zero, alongside a standing order to restore command authority immediately. This clear, unambiguous mandate left no room for delay or misinterpretation. A 3-star general unlawfully detained must be freed on sight. Meanwhile, Colonel Donald Rivers, the former officer who had leaked misinformation in an attempt to discredit Ross, found himself suspended pending court-martial. His rapid fall from influence served as a stark reminder that disinformation, especially when wielded by those in uniform, would no longer be tolerated. Taken together, these measures marked a sea change in policing culture. Training academies overhauled curricula to emphasize accountability and community engagement. Internal affairs units were restructured to report directly to civilian oversight commissions. And at every level, from rookie recruit to top brass, the message was clear: authority carries with it the burden of transparency. The system that once prized unquestioned compliance was now forging itself into one that valued accountability above all, ensuring that no one's voice would again be silenced by unchallenged assumption. Today at the Civil Justice Museum, a single glass case holds General Ross's scratched silver badge. There is no grand display, no lengthy plaques recounting every detail of the incident. Instead, the badge rests alone on a velvet cushion, its imperfections serving as a silent testament to a moment when one man's dignity forced an entire system to reckon with itself. Visitors paused before it in quiet reflection, reminded that truth does not always need a megaphone. A few miles away at the roadside intersection where Ross was wrongfully detained, a small bronze plaque has been affixed to a lamppost. Its inscription is simple: "Here justice was once broken and restored by someone who did not need to shout." Travelers and locals alike stop to read it, many clutching coffee cups as they consider the words. School groups from nearby towns arrange field trips to the site, and university professors direct their students there to contemplate what it means to be seen. For those young visitors, high school seniors studying civics or undergraduates in ethics seminars, the story becomes intensely personal. They lean close to the plaque and ask aloud, if he remained silent and yet was heard, why must we raise our voices to be believed? In moments like these, the image of a three-star general standing still unarmed and unbowed resonates more powerfully than any speech or protest. His restraint has become a living lesson, teaching that sometimes the greatest strength lies in knowing when not to act. Across the nation, community centers, law schools, and even corporate boardrooms have adopted the Ross moment as part of leadership training. They challenge participants to hold silence in the face of injustice, to listen more deeply before jumping to conclusions, and to ask hard questions about their own assumptions. Slowly but surely, justice is being rebuilt, not through grand gestures, but through countless small acts of reflection, each one a tribute to a man who reminded us all that sometimes the most profound power is the courage to remain still and demand our own system to change. Through this story, we understand that every individual, regardless of rank or title, bears responsibility to break the silence in the face of injustice. A single voice or a compassionate gaze can ignite the collective conscience and demand accountability. The message is simple: justice does not wait for loud protests, but is built through small, meaningful decisions. Courtesy, the courage to speak in faith in human dignity. Now, I invite you to share your personal perspective. Which moment in this story resonated most with you, and what do you believe is the key to ending racism? Please leave your thoughts in the comments. Dare to express yourself, for every voice counts. At the same time, offer your prediction. When do you think racism will truly end? Will it be 2030, 2050, or even later? Your engagement not only shows faith in justice, but also inspires others to act. Together, we can write the next chapter toward a more equitable world. Disclaimer: this story is entirely fictional. All characters and events are creations of the author and are not intended to reference or criticize any real person. It is designed to raise awareness of responsibility, justice, and the importance of treating one another with respect and dignity. We firmly oppose all forms of violence, prejudice, and injustice. Please consider this before viewing.